All right, let's go ahead and get started. I am actually at a conference this week, so I'm doing this in the hotel. Hopefully the Wi-Fi remains stable here for the meeting, but if I suddenly slow down or disappear, you'll know why that is. As we go through the agenda today, if I could request some assistance, both in putting notes into the document and helping me identify who might have questions or their hands raised. I'm limited down to one screen, which I'm not used to. So any additional assistance you guys can provide with that would be greatly appreciated. All right. All right. Is there anyone new who has not joined this section group's call and would like to introduce themselves? I think I recognize everybody, so we'll move on from that. All right. Hopefully everybody saw the email. If you weren't at the meeting where we talked about the spreadsheet, the categories, we wrapped that up end of last week. Sent the email out, I think, on Friday. So the matrix is done. The categories have been defined. It is available and open for inputs. There's only been a couple things added since then, but if everyone has information they'd like to start adding to that spreadsheet, please feel free to go ahead and do so. Any changes to that spreadsheet, any requests or suggestions for adjustments or changes, please open up an issue in the SIG repo so we can discuss any of those changes and determine if you want to do it. Any changes we make, you're going to have a ripple effect because this spreadsheet is a source of information for all three of the section groups. So we want to try and be judicious as we make any adjustments or changes moving forward. Any questions about that? All right. A couple takeaways from the recent the spreadsheet working meeting and the work group call. We're going to adjust our goal 1.2 to say that we're going to centralize materials on SKF. I need to get a link to the appropriate goal with Glenn. I'll take care of that offline. We're leaving the budget items for the tooling and librarian role in there, but we want to align with what the section 2 group is doing. And again, centralizing things around SKF does not mean that SKF is the sole platform. We need to determine if additional resources are needed and how to address those. But that's where we're going to start with. That's a good place to begin this because they've already got some maturity on there. They've already got a lot of content from a lab perspective on there. Randall.
So so you're aware, so we're kind of reorganizing SKF because there was kind of some additional people involved. So I'm sure that eventually maybe you, me, and Glenn should have an alignment meeting on how that's going and happening, just because that way we can align this spreadsheet with what's going on there.
When you say reorganized, without going too deep down the rabbit hole, what do you mean?
Well, there was basically, so SKF originally wasn't like a education platform. Originally, it was like a requirements platform, and there are some people that actually use those tools in Europe quite extensively and had pledged to donate money and set up a quote unquote SKF foundation in Belgium. So basically, like, we're kind of splitting things up, and we're splitting up like the education and like the knowledge and all and the labs and all of that into its own thing that we're calling SKG. But that's kind of something that's being organized currently.
Okay. So is Krob aware of this?
Krob hasn't really been around this week, so
yeah. He and I are actually at the same conference, so he's
okay.
actually talking right now as we speak at the conference. All right.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. We should talk maybe offline just to understand exactly what this means and what's happening for awareness.
Yeah, because basically we're taking all of our labs, all the content, and we're fitting it into a graph database on Neo4j, which is actually really cool because it's going to help us do a lot of the work here. However, we're also kind of in the midst of figuring all this out. It's kind of what's been going on this week because, yeah. So, yeah, anytime. But, yeah, that's what's going on.
Okay. Oops, let me make a note for myself on here so I remember. thanks for the heads up on that.
No problem.
Do you foresee any issues with this based on the expectations and the funding that's previously been put in SKF?
It's really hard. That's kind of the problem for me because I am supposed to be the architect of SKF, and it's really hard for me to like confirm budgets and be like, this is how it's going to work. Because like before I was working on trying to establish a workflow between SKF and OpenSSF, but it was really hard for me to work with that Flask system that we currently have.
Mhm.
So this actually really helps things and facilitates things. So it actually helps me do my job a whole lot better. So I actually think that this is going to help me get those workflows together so I can give you guys workflows on how the information is structured on SKF and what I would need in order for me and the SKF team to basically like take content and archive it and add it to the graph in SKF and add it to all of the information there. So therefore, all of that information gets enriched with the lexicon and the labs and all that gets linked together.
Okay. So Abhishek had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just to circle back on the issues for the Excel or addition of rows to the Excel. The Excel is currently not a part of the repository, right?
No, the spreadsheet document is not checked in anywhere. It's a Google sheet that we are using.
Yeah. So how do you propose people would add content directly to the spreadsheet? Is there some kind of review process that we'd like to have?
For the content pieces of it, it's basically open for anybody to add information to it. We're asking people to put their names next to what they add in there, so we have someone to go talk with if we have any questions or concerns about what the information has been entered. We are more concerned about any change to the spreadsheets along the lines of the categories that we're using to organize the information. So training can be freely added, and we'll work on curating that as we get more information. But issues should be created for anything like, oh, we need a new persona, or we need another category, or we need to start collecting another piece of information around the organization of the actual training itself.
Okay.
Makes
sense. I do think that potentially we can consider somebody who is like responsible for admitting it would be maybe a suggestion to add a new content, and then somebody would review it on our end.
Hopefully, if our budget proposal gets approved as part of the plan for next year, we'll have a librarian whose responsibility it will be to help maintain and organize that information.
If I may, Dave, because it is a graph database, so we were talking about this in the last meeting in SIG 2. So essentially, the more broken down the information we have, the more we can enrich it. So this kind of becomes an issue when you start dealing with things like David Wheeler's course, which is currently what we're on, like how we're going to break that down. Because if we can break it down to core concepts, it'd be easier to link other things to that and make it all work as one. So I think that's where the librarian would actually be very, very handy, would be to help with that breaking down of content, because I don't think that's necessarily about being optimum. It's also about being consistent.
Yep, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. We have to crawl before we can walk, and this is to help us start crawling. But yeah, down the road, if we have someone whose responsibility this is, that's part of the work that individual would do.
Correct.
All right, any questions? Nope. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. The second point for the takeaway is, do we need to add a section 1 goal around creating a curriculum framework? This is a more open question, not specific to gathering the content or organizing the content. This is more along the lines of, once we have the content in place, how do we build that information into some sort of curriculum? And I don't think we have that distinctly called out under any of the goals that we have at the moment. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Next week, I'm supposed to come with a map and a diagram of how the graph database works with the database or the stuff we already have. I think that this would actually be fairly easy to achieve with our new graph database, but I would suggest we wait to vote on this until I have that so you could also see it and then you can make an informed decision. But I think it's very low hanging fruit.
Okay. That's fair. We can wait.
Because I already have something in mind of how we can build a curriculum with the graph database, just adding a label to whatever is going to be. So like if we wanted information to be core, you just add a core label and then there you go. You have all the information for a core curriculum.
All right. Then that is an action item for you.
Yep.
And did you say you're gonna have that next week at the SIG meeting or 2 weeks at
Yes,
this meeting? Next week
I
at
will
SIG.
have that at the SIG meeting next week.
Okay, cool. Any other thoughts on that for the moment? All right. And then the third takeaway was around writing a primer for how to use the categories on the spreadsheet. So this is more of a little bit of context around the different types of categories we have there, the domains, the personas, etc. So people can translate what our intention is without trying to figure that out themselves based on the name or the words that we used. I know Sal had expressed some interest in starting to work on this. Is there anyone else who'd like to volunteer to help with that effort?
Sorry, which effort? I'm multitasking.
No worries, Eric. This is the putting together a primer, basically descriptors for the different category values that we have in the spreadsheets.
I'll help.
That sort of thing.
I can try and do that next week as well.
All right. Thank you very much. If I could ask Randall and Eric, if you could touch base with Sal, whether it's on Slack or over email. I don't know if she's had an opportunity to make any progress on this, but get the three of you. She mentioned she'd be interested in working on it, but I don't necessarily think that translates into she has time to work on it. But I just don't want to duplicate any effort. So if you guys want to just all touch base together, see where things are at, and then you can figure out how to proceed from there.
Yeah, I saw her last night at KubeCon. I'll see if I can run into her again today.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. All right. The other thing that we have that's looming here, we've got about a month left to figure out our section of the education SIG plan. So I was going to start working through some parts of that. Before I do that, does anyone else have a topic that they would like to bring up for some conversation? All right, I'll take your silence as negative on that. And again, if anyone can help, I'm down to one screen here. Any questions or anything that comes up that I don't notice, or any notes you might be able to help take would be appreciated as we go through this. So I updated the MD file after our last meeting, and some things have happened since then. So again, anything that's changed that it needs to be changed and is not yet changed is highlighted in yellow to make it easier to see on here. I think that goal 1.1, we've been through this a number of times. While I don't think it's necessarily perfect, I think it's pretty good. So if anyone has any suggestions to any of these goals, my intent is after I get back from my conference, probably not going to be until Sunday. On Monday or Tuesday, I'll go in and I'll make any updates we talk about in this meetings. But please put pull requests in on the repo for any suggestions you have for any changes to this part of the plan. So that way people have a chance to look at them and consider them before we talk about it again. But anything that we do in this meeting today, I'll take care of making those updates prior to the education meeting next Wednesday. Goal 1.2, I changed the wording around the second milestone there around centralizing materials on SKF. I need to link it to the appropriate goal in that section. Randall, based on the earlier conversation, I will await the chat between you and me and Crow and Glenn about what's happening there. We can add that verbiage in there to make this clear. The third milestone on here is talking about services and tooling needs. We need to come up with, so if you look under the budget, you'll see that we have the librarian role, and we also have an estimated 100K US for tooling, services, hosting costs. That's a very ambiguous line item, and we're going to need,
I'm working on that.
yeah, I understand, but we're going to need to flesh
Okay.
that out much better to understand exactly what that means, where those resources will go, and,
Yep.
and what the what the value add is going to be from them.
Yep.
Are there any additional milestones when you think about putting this information together that we should add to 1.2? Again, this is not our final answer, but this is the kind of thing we need to think about. How do we accomplish the goal, and what steps we need to take to get to that goal? I know a lot of this is still going to be fuzzy even after you put the plan together. We need to try and at least put together some ideas on how to achieve these things. All right, so I'll invite everybody to consider that. And again, prior to next Wednesday's SIG meeting, if you have any ideas or thoughts, please go ahead and add them to a pull request to the plan itself. 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5, we have not talked about a great deal. These are very, very thin. We need to make these much, much more robust. So goal 1.3 is determine venues and personas that content will be created for or delivered to. So this is somewhat of a dependency for section 2, since they're the ones that are going to be looking at creating content. We need to let them know what kind of content we believe needs to be created based on the information that we have. So I think the dependencies on this, not only do we need to have the materials matrix, but I think the survey we talked about doing to look for gaps should probably be finished, or at least in progress. Would you all agree with that? Survey is part
I think
of
it's in progress.
about one. Yeah, okay. Have that.
I guess my comment is, are we sure that it's part of this track? I mean, if we are supposed to collect and curate, is finding the venues and the personas, is this part of this track, or maybe track 1?
I would say
The track 2,
personally
sorry.
yeah, I understand what you mean. The personas, I believe, is something that would be our responsibility to identify and curate. Again, there's going to be overlap, I think, amongst all 3 of the sections on some of these things, and we're trying to make sure that no one section is just getting all the work. We're trying to spread it out as best we can. So I think the personas is definitely within our realm of responsibility to identify and curate, again, with input from the other sections as necessary. Anyone is free to contribute. When it comes to the venues, I think that's a good question. I was thinking about that myself. I think it would be helpful, since section 2 is going to be focused on creating content primarily. There's other things, but that's their primary focus. And section 3 is going to be focused on incentivizing and engaging the communities. I think it's probably an area that we can help with, to put together a list of places or types of events or venues or platforms online to help deliver the content. I don't think it's necessarily solely our decision, but I think by us putting this together as at least a basis for where this training may take place would be helpful. But I'm open to all opinions on this. Anyone else have any thoughts?
I have a comment for when we have our regroup session that, yeah, about because I think curating is also already something that SKF already does and something Glenn takes very seriously. So I just want to, when we actually have our conversation about that, I just think that that's something that we should definitely iron out and figure out.
Yeah, we started talking about that a little bit at the
Yeah.
at the spreadsheet meeting. Again, I think we try and keep the duties somewhat split, so no one group is taking on the vast bulk of the work. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation that's worth having.
No, agreed.
All right, so I'm going to leave this on here. Again, if anyone has suggestions on how to change this or adjust it or add stuff or whatever, I invite you to put some pull requests in, suggestions we can talk about and discuss amongst us. Let me see what's going on here. Formally document the personas. I think this might be done. I think between listing the personas that we have in the spreadsheets and putting some context around them, that may satisfy the second milestone on here. But I think that's somewhat TBD as we start digging a little bit more into how this is all going to work. And I did want to hear Sal's thoughts on that as well. Anyone else have any thoughts or inputs on any of the milestones for 1.3, including additional milestones that we may need to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna add to what you had said. It seemed like the material matrix had already covered the personas.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and if we're all good with that, then I absolutely say we should cross it off for now and maybe change that to a revisit the personas on some kind of regular basis. We're gonna need to keep this stuff updated, so we need to put a cadence into place to review all these categorizations, personas, and such to make sure that they're still relevant and need to be changed. So thank you, Christine, for that. All right, so again, as above, suggestions, thoughts on 1.3, please feel free. Provide feedback. You can provide feedback in this document, suggestions and PRs. Moving down to 1.4. This is defining training areas of focus. And I think that this is, let's see how we have this defined thus far. This really isn't a milestone. This is more of a how are we going to do this? So we need to put some milestones in here. But the general approach that we talked about taking was focusing not just on development skills techniques, but associated skills modern developers have, access control, testing, validation. You guys can read. I don't need to read this to you. But basically, it's looking at this from a couple different perspectives and determining how to focus some of these areas to reach the target audiences, the personas that we're talking about. So in my mind, this goal does not have any milestones attached to. We have an approach, but we need to break this down and figure out exactly how to identify the information that we're looking for. Any thoughts or feedback on that? Does anybody have any suggestions on how to approach this? Okay, so for homework this week, between now and Wednesday's meeting, I am going to ask, and I'll send an email out to the group. Please review the stuff in the plan. Please provide feedback, comments, and such. You can drop in this document here. Any changes, and like I said, put it in the PR. We're going to need to do some work, async work offline, to get this information into shape, so we're ready by the end of the month. Randall first, and then Christine.
The diagram will have guidance on this because the nodes will be identified. The types of nodes will be identified. So we have most of the educational material right now is identified as concepts. So we could use those as like pillars. I mean, as I said, the diagram should have some focus on this next week. Just
Okay,
throwing that out there.
appreciate that. Christine.
So was this kind of like an item relating to prerequisites or not? Just trying to understand it a little better.
I don't think this is necessarily prerequisites. I think this is how are we going to attack the problem? Beyond the types of educational materials that we're looking at. How are we going to get information into the developers' hands that they need? And it's not just coding information. It's information that cover all aspects of their responsibilities. It's compilers, it's supply chain, testing, that sort of thing. And we mentioned DevOps scenarios in here, open source, web API. I think this is really, what do we do to ensure that we have a well-rounded set of materials to help with each of the personas that we've got? Eric.
I think it's beyond that. It's also setting up an actual, not just the how, but actually setting up the phased approach to what mediums are going to be the most impactful, and how we can get that out the door. Because we've talked a lot about getting this information out via conferences or webinars or other things. But to what degree does this need to be more of a publicized, partnerships with like GitHub? Arguably the most widely used repository. Certainly there's GitLabs and other, but working with these organizations to make this something that's published by them as well, at least providing links and getting blogs that are in venues that almost everybody touches. Even people who are have less access. The free avenues like the GitHubs, everybody knows. If you touch technology, you know what GitHub is.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are the types of things that I think are going to be key, and not just the personas, but also, what is the, somewhat marketing aspect of how we get this out the door.
Yep, I agree. Again, if I'm taking some notes here, if I don't quite capture what you've said or you want to add anything to that, please feel free to jump in and help me out, make sure that the comments are clear.
Yeah, I will say one of the benefits of being part of a lot of these groups is I'm working on my master's degree, taking my marketing class right now, and this is a lot of fodder for my marketing plan for that paper.
No doubt. That's great. All right, anything else around 1.4? Let's talk about 1.5 a little bit here. This is identify and prioritize training content to be localized. So this is not necessarily about creating content. This is about figuring out the best way to localize content. Take content that we have and translate it into additional non-English languages. Again, we do not have nearly the degree of milestones in here that we need to. We identified as a team that we wanted to do this in year one. We wanted to localize some training to 5 human non-English languages. That's a very broad and open statement. We need to make that much more granular, determine how to get, which training needs to be localized, determine which languages we need to translate it into, source people who are skilled in this area and would be able to actually do this. We do have a budget ask on here, which is, I think, just a shot in the dark for how much something like this might cost. I've never done localization in any way, shape, or form. That's always been outsourced in areas that I've worked, so I do not know what the cost might be, but we definitely need to do some significant work on this goal. Christine.
So in terms of like localization, you kind of seem to have mentioned some of the milestones because you talked about identifying the actual languages is like key, and also just finding like the partnerships for those who can actually do the localization, and it can be very expensive.
Yep.
And I'm not even sure, even around localization, I don't know if there's like a milestone for this, but sometimes things are not contextualized for the audiences
Mhm.
that you are trying to approach. Like the examples could be things that does not even resonate with them. And that's kind of localization, but kind of not.
Yeah, I agree. It's more than just dropping this in the Babelfish and making the words different. There are meanings and contexts and all that sort of thing that, especially when you're talking about topics like these, we need to ensure that we're trying to cover as much of that as possible. This is not easy work by any stretch. I agree. Okay, so I just jotted down real quick a couple things that I brought up. Again, I think they need to be expanded on a bit and formalized a bit more. So if anyone has any additional suggestions on those, again, as above, please feel free to expand on what we've got.
Are
Goal-
we completely opposed to professional solutions? Because there are like actual some pretty like professional people or
I think-
outfits that use.
Yeah, I think anything's on the table. I don't know what kind of access different organizations or groups might have for this sort of skill. The Life Foundation might have people that they've worked with before that we can leverage that. But at this point, for something like this, I think you need to consider professional people who do this as their job.
Yeah, because I had to do some localization or translation once, and it was like a combination of you needed the person who actually did the translation, but you also needed like an engineer or somebody, because it was a technical document, you needed an engineer who knew that language to verify it and say, okay, this does not sound right. And it also, again, it depended on the translation company. Even if they were technical, you still needed an engineer or somebody to look through the translation and make sure it was something they understood.
And the community effort around the translation, because I've seen some UI-based projects that go that direction. Is that not something which usually works out? Like on a training material, maybe it's too textual, I guess, to...
Yeah, that works really well. I've seen the community kind of rally around and do a really good job.
Right.
Yes.
That's how we do it in JavaScript.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we should consider all options when it comes to doing something like this. And I think laying out how we're going to do that investigation and what kind of time frame we're going to need to do it needs to be part of the milestones for this goal.
I can kick this around the SKF team and see if we have any ideas, because I don't think we have any internationalization, but I can kick it around and see if they have any ideas.
Yeah, any resources anybody's aware of, absolutely. We'll talk about that once we get to the point, once we get to the point where we're starting to work on this. But we just need to lay out the structure of how we're going to go about it first before the end of the month, for the end of
Yep.
November.
Fair.
All right, I'll talk briefly about 1.6. Now, this is a year 2 goal, so I'm not as concerned about this one as the other ones, although we do need to have some information in here. This was around identifying different areas, systems, where developers are going to get advice on how to code and are copying and pasting solutions for various coding needs. Often these things are insecure. Stack Overflow is probably the one I'm most familiar with on this, but I have no doubt that there's others out there as well. So the intention here is to identify these systems and put together a plan to help them. I'm not sure whether we want to try and clean up the code, or if we're just going to identify and say these are these are systems that you need to be very careful of when you're grabbing information from them. Personally, as a person who's developed for a long time, I don't think that's going to dissuade developers from going to these areas. Hopefully, it'll make them think twice about just copying, pasting, and moving on when they find a solution. I think we need to put a little bit more scope around this one. and a little bit more clarity around what it actually is we're trying to accomplish with this one.
If I can offer something, so SKF actually had a tool that was going to be a command line tool that would actually check all of the stuff that's in SKF, like all the ASVS and WSTG. Now, the problem that we ran into, from my understanding, because I was not a part of the team at that point, was that the tool lacked context. However, now with the new graph database that we're working on, that might change. So there's a possibility that maybe that can be used for this.
So when you say it searches SKF, what does it search for? What does it provide?
It's so you would install it in your CI/CD, and it would just basically run the code. And if it finds anything in ASVS, like if it tests for example, cross-site scripting, it would flag it. Now, what was going on though is that it would flag a lot of things that might have been correct, because when I say the tool lacked context, there's sometimes when like it would just pick up a certain coding pattern that was not correct, and it would require manual intervention to see it, which some opinions of the people of SKF at the time were that's not a bad thing because you just have to manually check it, which it's still doing its job. However, what I'm saying is now with the graph database, that might be an interesting tool to come back to, because it would be able to identify context a little bit better.
Agreed. Tools like that are definitely useful. However, as cool as that is, I don't think that helps solve the problem we identified here, because for someone to be using that, they need to be aware of it, which is a separate problem that we could actually do something about if we wanted to. What we're trying to do here with this goal, what we're trying to achieve is, you know, a lot of the current developers, the knee-jerk reaction when I need to figure out how to do something is I jump out to Stack Overflow and I do a search and I find someone who's able to do what I'm trying to do or something close enough. I copy and paste their code into mine, and if it works, I just move on and do other things. And some of the code they're copying is not secure. Now, after that happens, a tool like what you said could potentially be helpful in flagging things that could be suspect and might need manual review. But I think we're trying to address here as part of this goal is, I'm not sure if it's awareness to the developers that pulling information from sites like these could potentially be dangerous, or trying to influence them to update and change the data, which again, in my personal opinion, is a very heavy lift. But again, you know, I don't think it's a non-worthwhile effort. We just need to figure out exactly what it is we want to accomplish.
Fair. Okay. I was just throwing that out there because I find, yeah.
I agree. Those types of things are very useful, and you know, publicizing that and trying to engage the community so they're aware of these types of tools and things, I think is very, very helpful. You know, it gives them another arrow in the quiver when it comes to, you know, trying to secure their code. And if we have them in the mindset of at least considering the security of the code they're writing, I think that's already a win. It's not the ultimate win, but it's definitely a win.
Fair. So you're talking more of like a guide or some sort of like educational, it says, because I think we've talked about it before about doing something with Stack Overflow, but I think that would be difficult.
I agree. It'd be very difficult, I think. So I think for this one, we really need to clarify what the objective is. We know that this happens. We know that there's poor examples of code on a number of platforms or systems that developers frequently go to when they're doing their coding. And we want to do something about that. But what's the end effect we want to have? Is it just alerting them? Is it actually trying to engage with these systems to improve things, or something else entirely? So I think that's something for us to consider, and make an adjustment to this one, just to make sure that this is very broad. This is like, we're going to go out, we're going to find these systems where developers get stuff, and we're going to make it better, which is great, making it better, but how are we going to make it better, and what's the definition of success?
I would say that awareness around the risks of using that code, I think, is probably about as good as we can do, because we can't prevent people from using it. maybe some recommendations of what you can do about it, I guess, if you're not sure. But I would say awareness around the risks would be primary.
So again, I'm gonna ask everybody between now and next Wednesday's SIG meeting to please consider the stuff we've talked about here. Look at the information in the plan. If you want to put feedback in this document, like I said, I'm probably not going to get the MD file updated until Tuesday of next week. Just 'cause I'm out of the office right now at a conference. But you know, we do need to start making some significant progress on this ACR. So we have 4 weeks left to get this wrapped up and in Krobe's hands, so he can then combine our goals with the goals from sections 2 and sections 3, put that in a cohesive format to present to the TAC. So we've got our work cut out for us here, and it's going to take contributions from everybody, and we're not going to be able to do it during just these meetings. We're going to have to do a lot of this work offline. So please, as you have some time, go through and feel free to add whatever you think makes sense. If there's an item that we would like to have an offline discussion on, email works. The Slack is available. It's a great place to do that sort of thing. But we definitely need to focus on this over the next several weeks. And with that, if there's nothing else for today, I think I'll wrap things up a little bit early and get myself together and head over to the conference center. Does anybody have anything? All right, cool.
Are you at which conference are you at?
I'm not. I'm at the Cleveland Information Security Summit. I'm not at KubeCon, unfortunately.
Alrighty,
But if you see Sal, tell her I said hi.
will do.
Appreciate that. All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody. I'm going to go over there and hunt down Krobe and let them know about the SKF stuff. And Randall will be in touch as far as we can have a conversation about that.
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
As always, have a
have fun.
good rest of the day.
Thanks. Bye.